All right, we are now officially live. It is Friday, May 30th, 2025. And let's see, there are at least three of us watching, even though the eye in the sky says 0 in chat. That's not correct. We have some habitues. Yes, you guys are showing up, which I think is a great thing. Today, we're going to be talking about polyamory. And it's interesting how this came up this week. And I forget who it was, and I apologize. Somebody in chat. And they even posted a comment yesterday, and I looked at it and I commented on it, and again I forgot who it was, so I apologize. But the third time I will remember, I promise that. Brought up Aubrey Marcus now claiming to be in a polyamorous relationship and promoting polyamory. And the weird part about it is that I was in Costco the weekend before, and I noticed a polypod. And you can spot polypods. They do things together. Like they will go out and shop together. They'll go out and they'll have dinner together, and you'll see like usually one woman and 3 or 4 men together. I'm like, well, that's an interesting combination. But they do things together. They're very public about, strength in numbers, right? Look, I don't. If that's a lifestyle that you're down with and you want to choose, great. I don't think it's necessary. I mean, polygamy is not legal, even in Utah, where it's probably more than likely embraced than in other places. But polygamy is still not legal. Polyamory is an undefined sense of polygamy. But what's interesting about polyamory, this is from what I can see, it is not like one guy and 3 women, although those things do occur. My experience with polyamory is usually there's 1 woman and 2 to 3 men. That's how I see the polypods kind of line up. But of course, there's variations. You could have 2 women, 4 men, right? The whole idea is these people are involved in a group relationship with each other. They all live under the same roof for the most part. They all have various kind of roles inside the relationship. They all have like sexual intercourse with. Now, I don't know where the boundaries are in poly, right? Like I did look at some statistics, and it seems like as far as like a profile or a type, the LGBTQ plus AI or whatever seem to align with polyamory, which is interesting, right? Because in that sort of cluster, you get, bisexuality, and you have women okay being with other women, men being okay with other men, men being okay with women. So I would say that part of that LGBTQ sort of nucleus is going to be the B part. That's going to be the B part. And again, I don't know what the rules are in a poly house. Like, do you all sleep together? Do you have, like I don't know, group sex? Or is it more like monogamous inside of the structure? I think all that's probably discussed and kind of literally fleshed out by the people that are in that situation. But it could be like, okay, yeah, I'm with you 1 at a time or something like that. Or I'm with you 2 at a time, or I'm with you 3. I don't, whatever the rules are, those are the rules that they establish inside that world. But I saw this group in Costco, and they're shopping together, and again, they like to do things publicly. And I think what they're doing is, number one, is they're displaying that they can be a family too. Right. Just like if you have a mother and a father and 2 or 3 kids and you're shopping through Costco, you're seeing the show on Rumble. Why is that? I don't know why it's on Rumble. That's weird. It should be on YouTube. It should be on YouTube. I don't know why it's not on, I don't know why it's on Rumble. Let me check YouTube. It's on Rumble. I did not make any kind of connection to Rumble whatsoever. No, it's on. So I gotta respond to Tom here. It's right there. YouTube. I have no idea why it's on Rumble. It's not finding. It's not supposed to. It's not supposed to be on Rumble. So you. Anyway, let me cut my volume there. All right. Okay. Let me get back to business. Let me get back to the business of the show here. Okay. So Dani's on her way over. Anyway, so I saw this, and then this comment in chat came up about Aubrey Marcus and him being into poly world, right? And then Dani, I think the same day, shot me a text about Aubrey Marcus and the whole poly thing. And I'm like, well, this is really interesting because now it's all kind of clustering, right? Like I have this moment at Costco, and then it gets brought up in chat, and then Dani brings it up, and it's like, okay, I think we need to talk about it. And one of the things that I've been noticing on YouTube a lot in terms of content creation, and maybe it's because of my algorithm, but there's a lot of conversation now about how culture is changed from the top down. And it's mainly coming from sort of the music world, or people that have been involved with music. And like there was a video that just started making the rounds about a guy, I think he's called Bad Brad or something like that. And I think he was in like a hair metal band or one of those kinds of bands back in the late 80s. And he dedicated a show to how the music industry made a decision to kill glam and to promote grunge. And he had a guy on his show who was deep in the heart of the LA glam scene right around 1990, and was selling out like the Whiskey and the Troubadour and all the places that that these bands would play at in LA. And then all of a sudden they couldn't get any gigs. And well, they could get gigs, but they were kind of drying up, and they were offered a one label deal with a major, and they really wanted more than a one label deal. And then that's when like their manager started poking around, and they got the word that their music was over. Like glam was going to be killed, and they were going to promote a different kind of music. And it was all based on demographics. And so the music they were going to promote was grunge. And of course, we all know the story about Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the whole Seattle scene, and literally how it completely disemboweled glam. And the reason why it was given that glam was no longer going to be a viable genre is because the music industry wanted music that would appeal to guys, and glam actually had a very strong crossover appeal with both men and women. Like women loved dudes with long hair and makeup. They loved it, right? And then you started to have the sappy power ballads and all that stuff, and that became very, very popular. And the point that these guys were making, which, like, I don't think glam, at least that version of it, the English version of glam is much more interesting as far as, you know, my taste goes. You know, like Mark Bolan and David Bowie and that whole world of, you know, even Slade looks a little glammy. You know, David Essex, Rock On, there's a little glam there. I mean, I think that's way more interesting musically. And there are some good songs that come out of the kind of the LA glam metal scene, but you can only take it so far, right? Like where do you go? Like you can only do so many sort of power ballads and you know, kind of hooky metal tunes. Like there's like an event horizon you eventually reach with that genre. It's like it doesn't really grow. You know, sort of like when Kiss started off and they were doing the makeup thing. And they're like, well, where do we go? Well, let's take off the makeup. And so they do that for a while because they think it'll reinvent them. But they're not very good without the makeup. So eventually they put the makeup back on and sort of reclaim their legacy. But that's what I'm talking about, right? Like there's only so far you can go with that genre. So I understand why the music industry would make that kind of a call. Now, the narrative that this guy brings up is that there's a shift in tone with the music from being upbeat and positive, which is what is associated with glam rock, unless of course your heart is broken, and then you're singing a saccharine sweet power ballad, and then it's like kind of off the rails. But I don't, you know, it's weird, right? It's like using glam rock as sort of a statement on social consciousness is just an odd thing, right? Like they were in retrospect, they're promoting glam as being hopeful and positive and fun. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. It's also really fucking shallow too. Like if that's what you're, you know, pinning your everyday hopes, dreams, and wishes on. And I guess working class dudes and girls, you know, that would be something that they would like hook into. But at the end of the day, it's like, really, you're putting glam up against sort of the dark future of grunge, and somehow because grunge is dark and nihilistic, it elevates the social consciousness of glam. I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily a great argument, but they do bring up something important in that it does set a very dark tone, and it's a top-down. It is a top-down decision that this is the new music they're going to push because they believe they'll get more male listeners. And then, you know, the result of that really shapes the culture. You know, especially with the death of Kurt Cobain, it becomes very, very nihilistic. And you have a lot of these guys in these glam bands. I'm sorry, the grunge bands are dead. A lot of them. And look, glam's claimed a few of its victims along the way as well, right? So it's not like they were immune to the, you know, what goes on in the world of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Just look at Vince Neil. Say no more. But it also happened at the same time when the record industry was also planning a shift from rock to hip hop. And that's another video that surfaced over the last week or so. And there's a guy named Academic Agent who shows up on the Lotus Eaters. If you haven't found the Lotus Eaters, it's a pretty good show. It's kind of a loose network of, you know, based dudes from England and they bring up a lot of topics that we talk about here. Some of them revolve around being English and their culture, and others relate to sort of global topics. It's a pretty good show. I'd recommend it. And there's this guy, academic agent, who shows up on the Lotus Eaters, and he was talking about, again, top down, right? How there were these decisions at a certain point to move away from grunge and into the hip hop world. And a lot of those decisions are kind of economically based, but what he doesn't talk about, he just looks at the numbers, he looks at the networks, he looks at the decision makers, and shows you how it gets done, right? So I'll give you an example. All right, so you have a Def Jam Records that is being run by Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin. Well, they report into like another layer and another level, right? Liar Cohen, right? Liar Cohen is one of these guys. When you go to all these different labels, all these different rap labels, Liar Cohen shows up in numerous layers. But ultimately, Liar Cohen reports to this guy named Doug Morris. And it doesn't matter what label it is, whether it's Interscope, whether it's Def Jam, whatever the label is, it is usually an imprint, and then it's underneath the umbrella of a major, and then there's another layer on top of who is at the major, sort of repping the imprint. So there's like this hierarchy, and the hierarchy leads to people like Clive Davis, Doug Morris, and I would say to maybe some extent Jimmy Iovine. But Clive Davis and Doug Morris, particularly Doug Morris, is at the top. So Doug Morris is making decisions across all these different labels and imprints, and the guys below him are basically implementing them on the label. And so what happens is that the major labels decide that they don't want to have to pay for bands, which is generally rock and roll, because number one, you got to pay more people, right? Bands are volatile. They don't always stick together. Like you could lose a singer, you could lose a major, and then it's like a headache for the label to try to figure out, oh, well, what do we do now? Andrew Wood just OD'd. We don't have Mother Love Bone anymore. What do we do now? Well, they got lucky because they found Eddie Vedder, but that's kind of the things that they were running into, right? So from an economic standpoint, they look at rap and they say to themselves, this is a much more economically viable model. We only have like one or two people that we have to deal with. Like it's either the rapper and the DJ. We can set them up with a production team. It's like way, way cheaper for labels to invest in hip hop than it is in rock. It's like it's a numbers game, right? But then you have to be able to like push the culture along with that in order to get people to buy into the records and buy into this culture change. And, you know, that's kind of where part of this discussion today comes in. So yesterday over on 15 Minutes of Flame, I talked about Tupac Shakur and how Tupac Shakur was one of these guys who was a cultural change agent. And I'm using the term loosely here, but he is a cultural change agent. And how he becomes a cultural change agent is he promotes thug life. Like this is Pac's personal sort of ideology. And what he is attempting to do is he's attempting to get mostly black males, although I'm sure there are some, can I say wigger? I'm white, I can say wigger, right? Yeah, so I'm white, I can say, you know, and some wiggers who go, oh yeah, dude, yeah, man, I'm so down. Yeah, I'm so down with whatever, right? The new No Limit release. Yeah, man. I'm really down with that new Mystical record, man. And so Tupac comes in and he brings thug life in. And what thug life is a kind of working class roots sort of ideation. like it's something that the Communist Party would do, to be honest with you. Right? Like it to me, it is a total sort of communist left tactic in that Tupac what he'll do is he'll separate like black males out of the black male culture. And he's talking directly to lower and middle class black males and getting them to honor their inner thug. It's almost like this weird sort of self-help kind of ideology. And there's videos of him talking about it. I can bring them up, right? So Pac is the preacher of thug life. And this is an important moment, right? This is a very, very important moment in the culture shift, in the culture change, and how we can see these top-down decisions, right, that are coming from the top of the pyramid that have these cultural agents that are embedded in the system that begin to draw, because they can't sell the product unless somebody is driving it, right? And unless enough people become saturated with the idea that they really want or need this thing. It's that simple. And so you have these people that are involved in that business, in that industry, that play that role. And then, of course, you have the whole East Coast, West Coast thing with Puffy and Suge Knight and, Biggie and Pac. And I think a lot of that was staged, to be honest with you. Yeah, there's a little bit of bad blood, but I think a lot of that was staged. I feel like a lot of that was sort of WWE choreographed stuff. Yes, Tupac Shakur did sleep with Faith Evans, who was Biggie's wife, and even rapped about it, right? So, but I've also heard where Biggie and Pac were actually okay with each other. Like there wasn't this like deadly rivalry between the two of them. A lot of that was for show. A lot of that was for publicity. A lot of that was to sell, kind of free floating in your system, right? And you're seeing these images in the culture. It doesn't matter if they're black or white or not, but you're seeing these images in the culture, and what they're portraying is kind of this negative version of masculinity. Guns, violence, bitches, hoes, right? I think that there's just a chemical reaction inside of young men that go, oh, wow, this is hard. Let me get tatted up here, right? So there's this diffusion effect that takes place. And I always found that when NWA would like tour and they would go to places like Omaha, Nebraska, that the place would be filled with young, middle-aged, like white kids, like, shouting out these lyrics about living in Compton. I always thought it was really, really odd for this sort of phenomena to take place, right? And again, it's this cultural saturation. It's top down. And at that time, rap is the music of rebellion. It is not grunge. Grunge is not the music of rebellion. Grunge is introspective. Grunge is not telling you to fuck the system or fuck the man. That's not what grunge does. Grunge is kind of like navel gazing. It's like heroin fueled navel gazing. So it is not the music of rebellion. Rap becomes the music of rebellion in the 90s, and youth are always looking for something rebellious. Like when I was 16, I heard the Sex Pistols. I'm like, fuck yeah, this is my jam. I love these guys, right? But I'd always been looking for the Sex Pistols. I was always on the hunt for like the hardest, like in your face music that I could find at that age. It's a byproduct of the biology. And so if you go back, like the 90s had hardcore, right? But hardcore had been around for a while. Hardcore really started to come on the scene in the late 70s and early 80s. So by the time hardcore comes along, it's really kind of commodified in some ways. And honestly, I don't find that genre to be very, very interesting. And by the time it gets to the Discord, Fugazi level, they're feminists. right? They're talking about like, they're like social liberals. And those kids that were in those bands in the Discord scene from Washington, D.C., they were all the children of people that worked in Washington, D.C. They were all the children of basically social liberals. And that is their music of rebellion. But they're not talking, they're not talking about really hardcore issues that match the music. They're actually talking about socially liberal, believe it or not, social justice shit. Right. And so is that really the music of rebellion? I don't know. Not really. And this is where rap comes in. Fuck the police, right? All this stuff, right? So it grabs people's attention from this place of this is the new music of rebellion. And that's how they push it through the culture, right? And then eventually they make this massive sea change between rock and rap. The other side of this also, and AA leaves this out because he's only looking at the numbers. But the other side of this too is that these music industry executives, they were also involved in the industrial prison complex, private prisons, not state prisons. So they all invested in them. And and I have two sources for this, by the way. One, I actually had literally a face-to-face conversation with somebody who is very deeply embedded in hip hop. And I spent a plane flight from California to Europe sitting next to him and just picking his brains, and basically got what I needed to know about the situation. And it's the same scenario that was kind of busted out much later on over the internet, where there was a guy who's in the music business and they had a big meeting and they all sat around and said, we are going to push not just rap, we're going to push gangster rap. Because at that time, there was sort of this competing camp of rap and hip hop, which was very political. You had people, groups like the Poor Righteous Teachers, who kind of sort of come out of this, 5%er world. You have Public Enemy, who are pushing sort of the Malcolm X trip, right? Like, so there's a political side of hip hop, and then there's the gangster side of hip hop. Well, they look at the two of them like, we're going to go gangster side because we have an investment in these prisons and we want to put as many young black men in prison as possible. And this is the music that's going to do it. Hence, Tupac Shakur, Thug Life, cultural agent of change. And this guy on the plane, I said, hey, look, man, what happened? What happened? There was a thing, because it was like there was this kind of conscious political hip hop thing, and then the gangster rap thing came on. And it seems to me like this is a long time ago. It seems to me like the record executives made a decision to, go right instead of left. He said, absolutely. That's absolutely what they did. And that's all top down. That's all top down culture change, right? So what we see like this shift from glam, which is kind of like the extension of, sort of rock and roll, right, to grunge, which is very different. And again, this is a top down music industry decision because they want more male listeners. And then ultimately to hip hop, and then ultimately to gangster street hip hop. And where are we today with hip hop? We have like mumble rap, we have trap. This music, in my estimation, is horrible. And I'm pretty eclectic in my musical taste. And there was a time where there were some hip hop artists that I actually really liked. Like the first Jungle Brothers record is fire, as the kids say. Right. So there's some interesting stuff, like the Gangstar stuff back in the day, really good. Blending sort of jazz samples and get your brand new heavies. Like, there's some interesting things going on. De La Soul, they were fun, they were cool, right? But all that is gone now. All that is gone. Now what we have is like really noxious, unlistenable music, and there's not even rock and roll anymore. right? Rock and roll has basically morphed into country and Western. LA doesn't have, back in the day, LA had all these studios and bands would go there and, they record records there. Like Van Halen, recorded all their records in, various LA studios. And like all that's gone. Like the business is gone. It's in Nashville. And what they've done with country and Western music is that they have turned up the volume to make it sound a little more rocky. And now they're incorporating rap into country and Western music. So country and Western can now attract kind of this, again, like the slightly rebellious nature of whatever goes on with teens at the age of 14 with the Saturn opposition. But rock is dead, right? They made and by the way, country and Western music isn't really rebellious. I want to be clear about that. It's not rebellious. It's never been rebellious. Even when they talk about people like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and, these outlaws, what were they really outlaws about? Right? What were they outlaws about? Oh, we're living outside. We're living outside the code of the land. Well, what did that look like? Like, I never found anything very outlawish about Willie Nelson and Waylon. And that doesn't mean that they aren't good artists. They are. Right. But country Western music is probably the least rebellious music you'll ever fucking come across. Right. It's going to appeal to, and I don't mean to like insult people that like country Western music, but it's going to appeal to a very broad demographic. Let's put it that way, a broad demographic. And if you can mention in your song about America, about your wife, your family, your children, your father, grandfather, like those are going to be the topical songs in country and Western. They're not going to take on the government, right? They're not going to stand out and, do a country and Western song about all the people being killed in Palestine. Like that's not going to happen. That's not how that genre works. It is a celebration of commodified American values, and some of them some of them are good values. Family, children, having a right relationship with God. I got no problem with that, right? But that's really where it ends, And then you get sort of the female side of the country and Western world, and they're talking. Taylor Swift's talking about all the guys that fucked her over, stealing Joni Mitchell's act. Right, which is what she does. I mean, Joni Mitchell was the first woman to actually sing about love and loss and relationships, and she did it way fucking better than Taylor Swift. So there isn't even any rock and roll anymore. There is no true music of rebellion. Rap isn't even really music of rebellion anymore because it's become so commercialized, even if it sucks, and it's become so commodified. But what are they really singing about? Money, women, drugs, the life, like that's really all that's really all the content's about. Unless, of course, you're Kendrick Lamar, and now you're woke, and now you're sort of going down the social justice sort of like path, which he's done, and he's like gotten into like quote unquote Black heritage and Black culture. That's fine, whatever, right? Is that really rebellious? So no, I don't think it's really rebellious. No, I think he's like pandering to an audience that is ready and waiting to hear for that, because culturally they're like, oh yeah, I'm down, right? And so people want their culture reinforced. If he was really rebellious, he would do the opposite, and he would do a whole album calling out the culture. But he would never do that because, well, he'd lose a lot of money, to be honest with you. So there's no real music of rebellion anymore these days. I think the new music of rebellion is podcast. This is the new music of rebellion. And it's not even musical. It's people showing up and basically telling you things sometimes that you don't want to hear, or you do want to hear, but nobody else is talking about it. And I'm noticing more and more and more podcasts are headed in this direction, right? They're headed. So this is really the sort of the new, I don't know, the new rock and roll, the new rebellion. We just don't play instruments here, right? So I'm sure Dani will have a lot to say about this, and she'll be joining us shortly. And that's really sort of part of the bigger backdrop, which is top-down culture change. And it's a very complex sort of algorithm when you really, really look at it, because a lot goes into play when something, like when they want to make a shift to like a new music. We'll talk about the Beatles. So the Beatles come along, 1963, like literally right on the heels of the death of John F. Kennedy, right on the heels of John F. Kennedy. And rock and roll in America is kind of in dire straits. Elvis is in the army, getting ready to go in the army. Chuck Berry's in prison. Buddy Holly's dead. Jerry Lee Lewis has been blacklisted because he's married his 16-year-old cousin or 15-year-old cousin. Little Richard, again, another guy who's been kind of blacklisted. So there's no real rock and roll coming out of America. You have, the great pretenders like Pat Boone, not very good. And you have like, I don't know, Frankie Valli and like the doo-wop groups. And it's just not really super interesting. Sam Cooke is around, but not for long. And then you have the Beatles, and the Beatles come along, and they are going to be the new top-down culture movers. They're going to be the change agents for the new culture. And when you look back on the Beatles and people understand sort of how they were not just formulated, but how they were marketed, then you begin to realize the early part of the Beatles' career is a total psyop. So when they would get off the plane in New York coming from England, like the people that were there to go nuts at the plane were hired. They were hired to do that. They were paid to do that. A lot of the early Beatles, like hysteria, was paid for. And then once it was paid for, it started to take on a bit of a life of its own, which is what happens with the cultural zeitgeist. Now, this doesn't always work, right? Doesn't always, because some things are pushed and they fall flat. But it worked with the Beatles. And so the Beatles move into this void where rock and roll in America had really flatlined. And if you look at all those artists that I talked about, whether it was Elvis or Chuck Berry or Little Richard, to a lesser extent Buddy Holly, Jerry Lee Lewis, those are all individual artists, right? They're all known for being Elvis Presley or Chuck Berry or Little Richard. And even Buddy Holly, like it wasn't the Crickets, it was Buddy Holly and the Crickets. And so when the Beatles come along, they replace the individual with the group. This is a really important piece to understand, right? The group is now going to be promoted and not the individual. And this falls in line with everything that will happen during the 60s and the promotion of group consciousness and the promotion of what I would call like the false Aquarian age. And the Beatles are also there almost every step of the way as drug culture also evolves. They're taking LSD and they're doing Sgt. Pepper, right? And of course, once they do it, everybody else is going to start doing it because it is the cool thing to, turn on, tune in, and drop out, right? And somewhere along the way, the Beatles are smoking weed, and like that becomes like they're a huge, huge change agent in the culture. But there were others too. Like the 60s were completely loaded, totally loaded. You got the Rolling Stones on the other side of it, sort of being the dark version of the Beatles. Mick Jagger's an elite, right? He is not some kind of working class kid. Mick Jagger goes to the London School of Economics. So he's like coming from this elite sort of place in the whole thing. And that's really how rock and roll takes off in the 1960s. And it's the Beatles that are leading the charge as these culture change agents, and then the top-down choices of the record industry to promote a particular kind of music. And they're very, very good at it. They're incredible at it. And again, what does it do? It moves us away from the individual, right? And that the group idea, the group consciousness is going to be kind of the central organizing principle of the 1960s. And it all culminates in the greatest group experience of all time through Woodstock, right? And they even talk about Woodstock as being related to the Aquarian age. So that's another version of like culture change and top-down culture change. And what's interesting is every now and then something will come along and it will be kind of a grassroots thing. And then all of a sudden, the people that are at the top look at it and they say, maybe we should consider jumping on this bandwagon and promoting it. And that does happen occasionally, right? And I'm trying in my brain right now, trying to rack up sort of like what that looks like. And I would say in some ways, the punk rock movement is kind of like that. I'm not talking about like the Sex Pistols, although they're important in punk rock, but more along the lines of like the LA scene in punk rock. Because it's very grassrootsy. It's like nobody's going to these shows. Nobody in the industry is promoting it. Like the industry at that time is really into big bands. They love the Eagles, right? They love how much money the Eagles bring in. They love Linda Ronstadt. They love James Taylor. They love all of these really, really big acts because they sell a shit ton of records. They tour. They make the labels a ton of money, right? They make a shit ton off publishing. So they love these groups. Like if they could just go on with those groups forever, they probably would have to a certain extent, but eventually they would age out. But so punk rock comes along and the majors don't have any interest in punk rock. They're like, this is not appealing to us. And there are 3-4 centers in the world where punk takes off. There's London, New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Those are the 4 sort of like punk rock meccas. And in LA, you have groups that are almost barely listenable, like the Germs, the Screamers. The Screamers never even, I think, had a deal. The Germs, I think, did have a deal. So the music industry is like, whoa, we're not ready to go here. But it wouldn't go away. Like punk rock would not go away. And these shows were getting sold out, like Madame Wong's in Los Angeles and The Mask in Los Angeles. And eventually somebody looked around and said, oh, there's a there. And that somebody was a guy named Howie Klein, who was originally from the East Coast. Like he was friends with Bruce Springsteen. When Bruce Springsteen would come to San Francisco, Howie Klein would like pick him up and drive him around. And Howie was really enmeshed in the in the San Francisco punk scene, right? And I kind of knew him a little bit. One time he even stuck me into a show, which was really cool of him because I was underage and it was a club that was so I saw him on the street and I said, hey, Howie, I'm underage, can you get me into the show? And he got me into the show and he was pretty cool. And he started a label called 415 Records, which I think one of the first signings was a group called Romeo Void. Eventually, Howie gets the attention of Warner Brothers. And he goes to Warner Brothers and they start their own imprint, their own punk imprint. And they sign X. And X is the band that changes everything with the major labels as it relates to what we call punk rock. And at that point, it's now being like cultured by the top-down decision makers. And that's one of the rare instances where something is really grassrootsy. But that doesn't really happen unless Howie Klein kind of gets into the mix and convinces the majors that this is really the sort of the wave of the future. Speaking of wave of the future, guess who's here? It's Dani Katz from DaniKatz.com. Hey,
How's it
Dani.
going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I just raced here from the gym.
So glad you could be here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I was looking for something that was going to fill out the conversation in my trash file, but it's gone. So it is.
That's okay. That's okay. So just to give you a heads up, since I hit go on the show, I've been talking about culture change and how culture change is generally like vertical, right? And comes top down. And I talked about sort of like examples of that. So when the industry was going to hardcore hip hop, right, versus sort of political Chuck D style hip hop, like they make a decision. We're going to go in this direction. And it's like, who's going to be the culture change agent? Well, it's Tupac Shakur, right? And he promotes thug life. And that is like this, working class sort of blue collar version of, hey, you may be, ghetto trash, but guess what? You can own it. And there's like this beauty in owning this idea that you're rejected and you're, thought of as ghetto trash. And I likened it in a lot of ways to almost a communistic sort of application of class struggle. Right. And Shakur comes from that world. Like his mother was a member of the Black Panthers at one point in time. I believe another member of his family is like in exile in Cuba. So he's like, he understands polemics, right? He understands how these things work.
Right.
And so while I do think that maybe he was trying to stick up for like the little guy, right? I also feel like in a lot of ways, he's sort of an early precursor to Donald Trump and they're both Geminis, right? And Trump is tapping into the MAGA base, right? And Trump is doing the same thing. He's like, you're being disregarded. Nobody listens to you. I am going to be your voice. So he elevates the MAGA base. He elevates a bunch of people who, for all intents and purposes, didn't have. This is the same thing that Shakur did, but he did it inside of the Black community. And as a result of that, the music that they're pushing now has a lot more ears to listen to it with. So that's where I started off with the show today.
Do you think that the people who preceded Tupac, I'm thinking of like Eazy-E and that whole like straight out of Compton, like do you think
they're part of it? They're part of the psyop. They're part of the psyop.
Yeah. I always wondered about like Chuck D and Public Enemy, because aside from the Jew hating, their messages were pretty positive. And when you go back and look at their videos, like the women were never sexualized.
No.
Ever.
No.
And I wonder, like, how did that slip through? Like, how did the lizards let something positive?
I talked about it, and I'll just repeat it very quickly. So, and by the way, what Danny's referring to is that Professor Griff came out and said the Jews run the music business, and he was done. He was no longer in Public Enemy. Right? It's like, see you, Rick. Our deal is more important than your free speech. Was he wrong? Probably not. But at that time, you couldn't say it. Today, Kanye West died for your sins. All right. So what happened was that there was a decision that was made at a high level around conscious political rap, Public Enemy being kind of one of them. You had this group, the Poor Righteous Teachers, group part of the 5 Percenters. There were people that were kind of in that world. And the story goes, and I have two sources of the story. One is personal and one made the rounds on the internet, where there was a record executive. He was brought to a meeting with other record executives, and he was told, we are going to promote gangster rap because we have a significant interest in the private prison industry. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to fill those prisons.
Right.
And what better way to do it than to promote gangster rap?
Right.
And to get people to live the thug life, the gangster life, and, start making money off these private prisons. I think there's a lot to that, to be honest with you. So it's an economic choice, but also I feel if you want to look at it from a political choice, it's much easier to keep that part of the culture at a much lower vibration, like barely getting out of their third chakra. We'll go as high as the third chakra, power, right? It's much easier to keep that part of the culture in that kind of category versus promoting the music, which allows that group to question the system. Because if that group continues to create music and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually their hegemony over that group will be threatened. So it's much easier to keep a portion or large portion of that community under their thumb by promoting really negative, dark, violent music because it's chaotic, it's not organized. You get a lot of black and black crime as a result of that, right? So they're happy with that, and then they got their prison system deal, and that's why the decision was made to go in that direction.
Yep, sounds about right.
Yep. So we're going to shift gears here, and the reason I started to talk about the top-down culture change, the verticality of it, is this thing with polyamory. And I don't know if you saw the thumbnail, but I'm going to bring this up, and I put it in part of the thumbnail. And Robin from chat, who's in chat today, sent this to me and got this to my attention. And we're going to transition into Aubrey Marcus here, but I want to show you something. And this is an example of like the top-down verticality of culture change. And this is from a recent copy of New York Magazine. It's very recent. I believe it's 2024, if I'm not mistaken. I want you to take a look at this cover because I don't think you've seen it, but check this cover out. And I may have to like kill the cover. Let's see. No, it's there. Can you see this? Can you see this, Dani?
Yeah. It's like a cat thruple.
Yes. Here, let me make it bigger. Hold on. Let me see if I can do this. Let's see. Hold on. No. Let me go back here to two of us. Yeah. So what they're doing on this cover is this is a cover story about polyamory. And this is very recent, and it's from New York Magazine. And they have like a cat cuddle puddle. I don't want to say anything else. I want your take on this cover.
Well, and also the patriotic colors. It's like good Americans triple up. Why cats? Like why?
By the way, there are two more cats at the bottom. There, five cats.
I can't see what's happening below, but it looks like the alpha cat has his paw, like he's keeping the stripy cat down. You've got the desperate black cat. It's like there's one clear king cat that I can see in this, and then the others are clearly subservient. He's very hierarchical, is what I'm getting from it.
It is hierarchical. It's also very diverse, right? They got cats of all stripes, literally.
Oh, right. They've got the ginger, the stripy, the black.
Let me see. I've moved it up. Can you see it now? Is there?
Now I can see it.
All right. So there you go. This is the practical guide for the curious couple, and they fucking use cats in order to push the message.
I'm so creeped out by this whole push right now, because I mean 10 years ago when people were talking poly, I'm like, are people still doing that? Like, still? Is this? I thought we outgrew that. Like, there's nothing about this that's new on any level. But what a great way for like the kind of left-wing social engineers to counter the whole like new like Christian trad wife, like that push.
Exactly, because that's going on too, right?
Yeah.
Like the trad wife is making a comeback, and now you have this whole other kind of cultural assault, more likely coming from the left. And again, we're talking top down.
So I'm just gonna name this, and I acknowledge as I'm saying this, I don't believe this, although conspiracy theorist paranoia can sometimes run through me. I'm struck by the choice to put Catz on the cover of an article about polyamory when I, Dani Katz, wrote a cover story about polyamory for the LA Weekly back in 2008. Just wanted to get it out of the picture.
Do you think that they're trolling you? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think I'm that important, but I think it's an interesting choice of animal.
It is an interesting, like,
for something that's not new or revelatory on any level whatsoever.
Like, why didn't they choose dogs? That's an interesting question.
Why not people? Like, since when does New York Magazine like turn to animals as stand-ins for human stories? Is that
look, I think it's pretty clear why they chose cats.
Why?
Because everybody loves cats, right? It gets into.
So many people hate cats.
Well, okay.
I feel like cats are very polarizing.
People like animals, right? They're animals. People like animals. And I think that they made those cats very, very friendly. And, you know, maybe there's a divide between people on the left liking cats more than dogs and people on the right liking dogs more than cats. So maybe that's a direct message to the left. I don't know. Maybe you can break it down that way. But I do think that here's the other thing about cats. Cats are independent.
Yes.
Right. And then if you put cats into a poly situation like that, like, what is that really saying?
Yeah, it's an odd choice. Like, why not an animal that actually pair bonds the way humans do?
But they don't want that, though.
No, they don't want that. They don't want. So, like, cats aren't going to be phased about, like, not spending the night, being second, third, fourth best. Like, cats don't care about any of that.
Right. They're cats. They don't give a shit.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's kind of intentional too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and
weird.
you know, the saying goes, you don't own the cat owns you. And like, there's something there to that. Like nobody owns anybody in that, you know, that little the kitty pod, right? They're all kind of independent and choosing to be there.
I know you're a cat lover and a cat owner. Like, I don't even know that cats are from this planet. I feel like they're an alien consciousness.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So is this like a kind of a nod to their cat alien overlords from Lyra or something?
I don't. Maybe. Let's see. Somebody said, who was it? California Contrarian. Cats are poly in nature.
Is that true?
You know, maybe. I mean, they certainly have interesting bonds with other cats in group settings. Like they definitely have interesting bonds. Like for instance, Joan got a new kitten and brought the kitten over a couple times, and Jasper didn't want to have anything to do with him. Mm-hmm. But Peaches definitely wanted to bond with him, and definitely, because he's so tiny, I think she wanted to mother him, right? Like there was something maternal about what she was trying to do with this little cat. But yeah, I mean, like I suppose if you could say that Jasper and Peaches had a monogamous relationship, Peaches was like maybe stepping out a little bit on this little cat. I don't know, like it's a bit of a stretch, but I do think they have a different kind of relationship amongst either, like even like when they talk about how cats perceive us, right? Mm-hmm. Cats perceive us as being a part of their world. Mm-hmm. Like they see us as like other cats in some ways. Mm-hmm. Like there have been scientific studies around this. Dogs don't have the same perception as humans.
Okay.
Dogs see humans differently. Dogs live in a much more hierarchical kind of world. Right. Hence we get the term top dog. Right. So in that world, the human would be seen as the apex in the dog world. In the cat world, the human is not the apex. It is part of the cat world. Right. So it's very different.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you watch the Aubrey threesome podcast?
I did not, because I was like hoping to find the link, and I just got spun around. Is that something we can just like launch live here and get kind of a taste of? Do you know where it is?
Yeah, I sent you the link. Let me pull it up. Have you seen the backlash around it? Do you know any of the hullabaloo?
No, it literally just crossed my screen the other day when I was talking about this polypod that I saw in Costco, and then somebody brought up the Aubrey Marcus thing in chat, and then you jumped in on my text and you brought it up independently. I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Okay, I'm putting it in the studio.
Okay.
I was because to me it's so loud in terms of something that's not really that interesting or incendiary in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I mean, I've seen at least a dozen podcasts posted. I haven't watched them. Everyone has a take on it. And it's like, why is this getting so much play? Why do so many people care? You know, Emily and I already covered like how weird it was. It's Aubrey, his wife, their lover, and then Mark Gaffney, convicted sexual predator. And I'm not one to use that phrase lightly, but Gaffney's their rabbi. Gaffney has this One World Religion organization with Ken Wilber. Barbara Marx Hubbard used to be part of it, but Aubrey
really is Ken Wilber still alive?
Yeah, but in a weird way. He shows up wearing wigs on all these shows. He's definitely something. I mean, his work has never resonated with me, and I've certainly tried. But he's gone quite off the rails. In my
yeah. What? So I want to ask you a question about that. Like, I tried to read Ken Wilber, and like back when everybody was hailing the genius of Ken Wilber.
Yep.
And it's like it just was not sticking with me at all.
Same.
Right. So why do you think you and I? Because I think we're both relatively intelligent individuals. We have the grasp of a lot of different systems. Why is it that Ken Wilber's material couldn't stick to us? Do you have any idea about that?
Well, for me, it was because I was familiar with spiral dynamics and Claire Graves' work before I tried to get into Ken Wilber. So I thought first and foremost, it was like, why is he taking Claire Graves' work and not crediting him and then overcomplicating it, you know, so much with this like really heavy intellectual bent? It just felt like deliberately opaque to make him seem smart. Like it was making it complicated for no reason.
Yeah.
It just didn't resonate with me. It was just like flat, one-dimensional.
I totally agree. And when you read his material, it sounds really intellectual, really philosophical. And it's like, what the fuck did I just read?
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing here. And it's like, you know, he's one of these guys that talks about like coming from the heart and everything. Really? There's no heart in this.
No.
Right. So, and he's had this cult following for like a long time. In fact, the band Live, they were kind of adherents of
really?
Ken Wilber. Yeah.
I feel like he's kind of a predecessor to Jordan Peterson in that he does seem to attract a predominantly male fan base.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because it's heady, right? So, I mean, but I'm not even sure it's like, I don't know. I've read heady people that I'm like, holy shit, man, this person's really saying something.
Right.
But I never got that with Ken Wilber. So he is connected to somebody who has launched this poly movement.
No, so
okay.
I sent you the link in the email. Let me see if I can pull up.
Which email did you send it to?
RFP.
No, RPM.
RPM. Maybe I sent it to the wrong place. Hang on, let me pull it up because I sent you a bunch of things, which my apologies if I sent it to the wrong place. RPM 1122.
Okay.
Soho.
Yeah, let me check that. I don't even use that anymore, but let's try it.
Oh, sorry. I think
that's okay. That's all right.
So I'm going to drop in the chat their One World religion organization.
Okay.
Which I feel like is worth scanning through. So Emily and I have covered this quite a bit, and my sense is that this is the spiritual tendril of the larger Santa Fe Institute psyop, which gives us Consilience Project, Lifeboat Institute, and I'm pretty sure this is connected. This is a spiritual arm. So I was already weirded out that Aubrey Marcus was invited to replace Barbara Marx Hubbard as this, whatever his title is for this world philosophy and religion organization. I had Mark Gaffney on my podcast to talk about it. He was a total psycho who was clearly high on something. And it just seems to be this rebrand of like why one world religion is a good idea. And just like, you know, I've made this comparison before, just like in Private Benjamin, when, you know, they pitch Goldie Hawn, I'm like, no, this is a newer, cooler spa-like army where you get to live in a condo and have massages. It's like, this is their newer, cooler, friendlier one world religion that they're trying to sell us on.
I just found your links. So I'm going to load them up. Give me 1 second here. I went into my email and I found it. Wholemate, the future of relationships. So I just found that.
Yeah, that's their new book. I think that a bunch of them wrote together. I'm also pulling up Mark Gaffney. Are you familiar with him?
Mark Gaffney was somebody who kind of came across the Mondo world at one point, but I'm not entirely like familiar with him. But he was like kind of in that Mondo universe.
So I'm just pulling from his Wikipedia now. In 2004, Gaffney was accused by 2 women of sexual assault during the 80s when they were teenagers. In 2004, he acknowledged a 9-month relationship with a 14-year-old girl when he was 19. He denied the relationship was abusive, describing it as consensual. As a result of these allegations, Gaffney returned his rabbinical ordination from Rabbi blah, blah, blah to spare his former teacher any further embarrassment. I think this is pretty much a snow job, is my guess. Because I know he was like working for Whole Foods and he got fired because of a lot of the sexual allegations. So it's odd to me that this was the guy who they chose to come on the podcast to legitimize the spiritual mojo of this throuple, which he rebranded Radical Monogamy.
Radical Monogamy. Interesting.
Yes.
All right, so let's do that. Here we go. Let's do this. I got the Wholemate. I got it up here. Right there. So that's what you're referring to. The future relationship like Dr. Mark Gaffney and Barbara Marx Hubbard.
The whole Center for World Philosophy and Religion, if you go to About, you'll see what they're creating. And this is a Ken Wilber, Mark Gaffney partnership.
Okay.
And I think there are other participants who are also, you know, we've cross-referenced them to Santa Fe Institute.
Interesting. Barbara Marx Hubbard. Wow. That's somebody with a pretty significant background.
What's your take on her?
Well, she's a Luciferian. Like, she is a true Luciferian. And
how are you defining Luciferian?
Well, okay. I believe that this is just my belief. Like, we are God, but we are not God. Right? Like, this is my belief about my relationship with God. It's like we're the center of the universe, but we're not. So there's a part of us that is God and God incarnate, and we are ultimately doing our best to become aware of that, right? But we also understand that we are not the center of the universe.
Right.
Whereas Luciferians would say, we are it. We are God. We are everything. And I think that that's a difference between the two, at least for me, because I still leave some space for like something that's part of me that can still inform my experience. And I'm like either, you know, took by wonder or by whatever it is that is happening in my life. Maybe it's not so wonderful. Maybe it's like, here's a lesson for you, motherfucker, because you fucked up and you need to look at this, right? Whereas I think Luciferians, this is just my take, they're not there. Like, they are everything. And I think Barbara Marx Hubbard comes from that place. And if you look into her background, her father was what's his name? I'm spacing on his first name. Marx. He was the head of Marx Toys. Louis Marx was Barbara Marx Hubbard's father.
Mm-hmm.
So Louis Marx is one of these guys that gets in on the Marshall Plan very early.
Okay.
And he moves his toy manufacturing from the United States to Japan so they can make cheaper toys in Japan. Mm-hmm. So Marx Toys really blows up in the 60s and the 70s. And again, even with the toys, like, the toys are also part of this idea of shaping the culture from the top down. Right. So if you go back and you look at the 60s and the 70s, mainly the 60s, when I was buying toys, or toys were being bought for me, there are very specific toys, like guns are really, pushed heavily as toys. Like the whole like secret spy shit, like I had a little secret spy man from Uncle briefcase with, guns that can be put together in 3 different ways. Right. So her father, Louis Marx, becomes a toy titan. And it's because he's in on the Marshall Plan with Japan. And as a result, Barbara Marx Hubbard, leads this life of, I would say, intellectual leisure, mm-hmm. and then begins to evolve these philosophies, these like New Age philosophies that I think at their heart are Luciferian. And there was that documentary that came out, like I think around 2011, 2012, and was put out by Foster Gamble.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name of that?
Was it Thrive?
Thrive. It was Thrive. Mm-hmm. And Barbara Marx Hubbard is all in that documentary.
Interesting.
Right? Like, she is one of the spiritual figureheads for Thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, the Gamble family, mm-hmm. and Procter and Gamble, and like their products, again, top-down culture change, and their imagery and symbolism, it's like, and I think Foster Gamble may have been waking up or something. I don't know what his story was. Like, he claims to have been waking up, but at the same time, he's sort of waking up into another version of his background. Mm-hmm. Right. It's just a more holistic version of his background.
Yeah. Robert Forte put me in touch with Foster when my pop propaganda book came out, and he blurbed it for me. But after that, Robert told me that he felt like he'd turned to the dark side. This is hearsay. I don't know him. All we ever did was email, but they had been tight. And then Robert was like, I don't know about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly fell off the map, didn't he?
Yeah, I think there was a health issue. I think he had some sort of health thing happen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because he was all set to do all these live events, and this is another going to be one of these culture change moments, and then all of a sudden he just disappears.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a bunch of videos here on Aubrey Marcus and polyamory. And some of them go way back. Like, he was talking about this stuff, in 20, let's see, a new pattern of sacred relationship emerges.
Yeah.
That's from 2 weeks ago. Is that what you were talking about?
So, I put the clip in the chat of the new one, but
okay.
Aubrey had a very public stint with polyamory a few years ago, before his car accident, before stuff got seemingly globalist and satanic, with his then partner, Whitney. And then that blew up, and he met this woman, Vylana, at Burning Man, shocker, where Shanahan meets all her billionaire Jews as well. And they got married really quickly. And it was kind of a red alert for me, and in like what Emily and I track of like, okay, now he's going mainstream, so he has to be married, because that's kind of the formula for all those guys to have like, well, if we have a more traditional like foundational structure, we could go more far out with what we're sharing. And then he just came out with this one, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, that seemingly broke the internet. And it was just so odd of like, why is this so loud and big? And the way that it was presented in the podcast is like they had discovered this new thing that no one had. Like, there's Aubrey's explaining when he meets Vylana at Burning Man, and he was still with his former girlfriend Whitney, and that Vylana was confused why he was hitting on her because he was there with his girlfriend. And he's like, oh, this is a new way of relationship called polyamory, as though like he just discovered the term, right? And so they're there with their lover, who's looks like their daughter. And then there's Mark Gaffney to like reframe everything that's being shared as this like higher spiritually evolved radical monogamy. And then so post that podcast, dozens have hit the scene of every podcaster in the world has to have some response and some commentary on it. So I was already on alert as to like, why is this so loud? Like nothing about this is new. I'm not getting it. And so I had sent you what inspired me to reach out to you was this woman, Blue of Earth, who's been on his show a few times, seems to be another part of this particular spiritual op. She showed up on her Instagram a month ago wearing a Maltese cross. Goes to Egypt a lot with Matthias DiStefano and Robert Edward Grant and Aubrey to do ceremonies in the pyramid and whatnot. She put out a video this weekend of some ritual she was leading at High Vibe Festival with some like vortex ceremony. And I'm like, it's just weird to me that two people, part of the same op, part of the same tribe, are doing these big, they seem like rituals to me to herd the energy in certain directions. And so just my spidey sense went off, which is why I reached out to you, because I'm like, is this astrological? Like, none of this feels organic at all to me.
Well, yeah, this gets back to the top-down narrative of culture change. And when you have a top-down narrative, you need culture change agents. And some of these people are witty. They're witty culture change agents. They know it. They know what's going on. They know who's paying their checks, and they may be philosophically or spiritually aligned. Some culture change agents are useful dupes, and they're just doing it because they think it's really cool, and they're kind of riding the crest or the wave of, you know, like whatever's happening, right? Like whatever's being presented. So I think Joe Rogan is clearly a high-level culture change agent, and has been for a long time. You don't get to that position that Joe Rogan is in. And that's not to say that Joe doesn't have some organic talent. I think he does. I think at times he can be a very good interviewer. He can be very empathic, right? But on the other hand, you don't get those massive contracts unless you are like checking a box and you're in the system. And how Joe got there is he started to appeal to young men. Like that's where Joe got his traction, and he brought in the MMA stuff, and he, you know, brought in things that young dudes would be interested in, like Bigfoot or, aliens or, you know, flat earth or whatever, right? It's like, he was this guy that he didn't always believe in those things, but he'd bring people on that did, and he'd have conversations. And that really attracted a lot of young men to him. And it's like, okay, we got a guy that can really move the needle with the male population. And at that point, obviously he becomes massive. It's the huge Spotify deal. And like, if you get on Joe Rogan and you have a book or you have a record or you have something, you will blow up, right? That's how important Joe Rogan is to the culture at this point. And so Aubrey Marcus comes through the Joe Rogan world. Like he is a bro. He's a brogan. And
well, they were partners in on it. Like they're like direct.
Right.
It's not even like by association of being on the show. Like he partnered with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan put Aubrey in the public eye. And after the Matthew North documentary came out about them, they haven't been seen on camera together since. And Matthew North is dead.
Yeah. So people who may not be familiar with Matthew North, who's no longer alive, by the way, Matthew North did a major expose on the Joe Rogan, Alex Jones scene. And it included Roger Stone, Roger Stone's trainer, sort of this cult of HGH, working out, what else? Coke, ecstasy, trannies, psychedelics, trannies, right? Like they're really a Luciferian territory there, right? Like, and so Matthew North did this series of videos on them. They're quite long, and they're very shocking in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew North is dead,
mm-hmm.
right? He's no longer with us. So Joe Rogan promotes drugs, right? He promotes drugs. He promotes drugs with the smoking of marijuana on the show. He promotes ayahuasca. He's had Aaron Rodgers on a number of times. Aaron Rodgers was in a relationship with Blue of Earth. Oh. She was the one who got him to go to the ayahuasca ceremonies in wherever, Central America or South, wherever they did them. He was connected to Blue of Earth.
Okay.
That was his like muse. She was his gateway.
Okay.
And so she is definitely tied into the Aubrey Marcus, Joe Rogan world of psychedelia. In fact, there's even a video on her page, which is polyamory and ayahuasca. Right.
When's it from?
4 years ago.
Yeah.
So let's play a snippet of this video that you sent me so people know exactly what we're talking about here. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, here we go. Shut this down. All right. All right, so this video is called "A New Pattern of Sacred Relationship Emerges," and then I think you have this queued up right to where we want to start it.
I hope so. I don't know if I did.
Let's that's where it showed up. Let's get into it.
Okay.
In that moment, I think we all just kind of shared this, like, what do we do with this, while also acknowledging that there was something that was coming to meet us.
So this is the lover.
I think we made intentional.
What does she mean by that? That there was something coming to meet us?
Okay, so the whole narrative around this is that this was spiritual destiny, which is kind of Aubrey's MO. Like when he came out full force for RFK, it was like ayahuasca showed me that he's our savior. So the story is that Aubrey and Vailana took their lover with them to Egypt, where they were doing ceremonies in the Great Pyramid with Matthias de Stefano, who is very close to all these people. And when he was in the Holy of Holies, Isis came to him and told him that he needs to impregnate both of these women together. And then the drama started. But the whole thing is guided by, this has been, they're just following God's orders in being in this polyamorous triad. And it's much bigger than them, and it's spiritual destiny.
All right, let's hear some more.
Choice to kind of bracket this mystical experience and temporarily regress back into our pre-tragic. Let's just try to keep things back to where they were.
And that's a good moment, right? I remember in this moment, I remember where I was sitting, and Aubrey, you left a long message from Egypt, and I looked at it and said, that's a really long message. Like, what's that about? So I listened to the whole message, and, I turned to KK, Christina, my wife, and I said, they're in trouble. And I said, I thought this was going to be easy. We were just studying. I said, this is going to be a long year. But everyone was so deeply authentic and graceful and pained and broken, and there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. And
what do you make of that?
I mean, I think he's such a freaking creep. So he has his tragic, pre-tragic, like he's created a cosmology around radical monogamy, and then he just attaches. It's very similar to what Ken Wilber does, right? Like they just make up these phrases and categories for these made up phases, and he's here to just like rebrand the whole thing and spin it all. It's very bizarre.
You know what this reminds me of a little bit? It reminds me of, Paulo Freire? Paulo Freire?
Yes, and I love the show you did with the Creamies about him.
Okay, so the linchpin of Paulo Freire's belief system is that the individual must die to their, what he would call, separate consciousness, and be reborn as someone who identifies with the oppressed, right? That is Freire's kind of major thesis for awakening into like this relationship of identifying with the oppressed. And he's so almost like, religious about it. And in fact, he even calls it like, people have to have their own personal Easter. And he's like, swept up by the Council of Churches.
Okay.
And because that's an ideology that's transferable to like the story of Jesus. And so as a result of that, Freire's concepts are now almost completely integrated into both the Catholic Church and any number of denominations inside the Episcopal Church, right? But this sounds very similar in that it's like you have to go through the pain, you have to be broken.
Yes.
But when you come through the pain and you come from being broken, you awaken to this glorious world where there are no boundaries, there is no ego identification, and you are now connected into this world of sharing and bliss and deep communion with others. Am I kind of getting this?
You're spot on. You're completely spot on. And that the heartbreak, because during this, Aubrey's wife, she breaks down crying about how painful this is and how wounded she is around this. And then Mark's spin is like, that's good.
Right.
That's good.
Right.
That's what love is.
Right. Right. That's where you want to go. You want to be broken.
Yes.
Because when you're broken, I mean, let's just, fucking, call a spade here. It's like programming.
100%. 100%. And and they've been, in my estimation, like from watching this for the past several years, it seems like they're trying to prop Aubrey up as a cult leader, as a messiah, as some sort of like, King Solomon descendant who's prophesied to like be the spiritual leader of the planet. I feel like this is where they're taking it.
I don't think you're wrong about that. And I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the roots of Aubrey Marcus, right, he's kind of a Chad, He's not some real femme guy. Like, I think he tried out for the Philadelphia Eagles, was in their camp and played tight end for a while. And then something happened, he got hurt. And then he goes into the MMA world, right? And he's got like about 25 fights under his belt. And I don't even really think he liked MMA. I think he did it because he probably has something to prove to himself, but also looks really, really good on his resume, right?
Right.
And then doesn't he do like a stand-up comic or something too? And he's got that kind of under his belt. So he's like establishing his cred. And now he's sort of like off into this whole other vector, but he has all these other things behind him, which gives him like this sort of Chad cred. I could totally see what you're talking about and how they're trying to position him as this kind of figure.
Yes, exactly. And so it just, like I said, I was curious about the astrology around it, like why this is a big deal now, why the people are taking the bait, why so many podcasters care enough to respond. I mean, Brandon Broslarth has put out multiple responses to this. And again, it's like, this isn't new. This isn't that interesting. Like, what is going on?
Let's put a bit more of this. I want to hear what else they have to say. And then we'll jump into some of this other stuff.
Aubrey, what you just mentioned there in passing, and what we're all pointing to was this thing of bracketing. So I want to get this bracketing thing, in play. A genuine person who's on a quest knows when to bracket. And bracketing means, I don't know what to do with that. It's radically irresponsible to act on. I can't close down and just pretend it didn't happen. So what I do is I bracket it and I step back into my life. And then we see, is it going to be persistent? Is it going to come calling again? Or will it recede? Was it a moment? And there's a great maturity and depth. Trustable people know how to bracket. Right? It's not an impulsive move. This wasn't an impulsive leap into the abyss. It was like, whoa, we listened and we bracketed. And then the journey begins. But now we're trying to go back to the pre-tragic, but once the tragic has disclosed itself, and the tragic is not horror, the tragic is lack of clarity. Right? Pre-tragic is clear.
So Robert,
the tragic is
Yeah.
where should we go? What should we do?
Just to contextualize what he's saying. So they all met on Raya, which is like a rich famous person dating app.
Really?
And they were throwing down like with their sexual threesome for a while until they got this prophecy or Isis spoke to Aubrey in Egypt and said, you need to impregnate both of them. And what Mark is now speaking to is like, oh, they slowed their roll on the sexual relationship while they were processing that both these women were supposed to have Aubrey's babies.
Right. Well, this guy is really slick. He is very, very slick, and he's very good at contextualizing, recontextualizing, formatting, bracketing. Like, he's very, very slick and very good at it and creating this language. Like, the pre-tragic was clarity.
Right.
Like, and now you don't have clarity, and now that's tragic. Well, that's a very sanitized way of saying people's lives got fucked up, right? And there's wreckage and there's carnage. Right. And because there's wreckage and carnage, there's no clarity. And it's a very sanitized way of like describing their experience.
He's like the AIs that I'm seeing in this whole Eliza effect, where like these people are having conversations with their AI and the AI just kisses their ass and throws their language back at them and props them up. And that's all Mark is doing, is like rebranding everything they're doing as wonderful and evolved. And this is why they're such leaders in the radical monogamy space. And like, that's his function.
Right. I can see that. I can totally see that. And there's always, to me, it's always fascinating how people language and recontextualize things like pain and suffering and even like degradation. Like, they come up with really interesting angles and ways of talking about it so that it doesn't necessarily sound as bad as it actually is.
Totally.
Yeah. It's almost, honestly, it's almost psychopathic, to be honest with you.
I mean, he strikes me as a psychopath. I don't know Aubrey, and similar to Joe Rogan, like I sometimes enjoy his shows. Like, he has interesting guests. He's very smart. Like, he puts words together very well. They're upsides. I did hear from one of my colleagues who moved to Austin when the pandemic hit, where she was in Cali. And she said that she was so creeped out by all the Satanism coming out of Aubrey in that community that she left the state entirely. So again, it's just hearsay. I don't know.
How would that, what did that look like? Did she
I think it
tell
looked
you?
like rituals. And I think it looked like the community gatherings around, like at the time, it was like the freedom people who are getting it seemed to be tainted by satanic ritual. But I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So what do you think would comprise a satanic ritual? Would there be some kind of like sacrifice of something live, like an animal or a human?
Maybe. I feel like, yeah, there could be pain. There could be the, I mean, like what we're seeing in this podcast, it doesn't seem like Aubrey's wife is really on board with this. It seems like, my interpretation is that she's acting against her own best interests. I think a lot from what I hear of these rituals and initiations is enticing people to act against their best interests.
That's really interesting.
And then using it against them. I also believe that Blue and Robert Edward Grant and those people are probably Rosicrucians, but definitely one of the secret societies. And ever since Aubrey kind of started grouping himself with these people, he talks a lot about Hermeticism and sacred geometry. It just feels like these people are, I don't know if they're part of the Sabbatean death cult. Like, I don't know, but I think there's a cult here. And I think what we've been witnessing over the past couple weeks is some sort of cult ritual.
So, yes. And there are two things I want to touch on. Number one, when you brought up Aubrey's wife not being on board with it, that to me is almost the psychological or metaphorical equivalent of a sacrifice.
Totally.
Right. She may not be dead or have her heart pulled out of her, but that person that she was probably shattered. And that identity is probably no longer, right? But in their world, that's probably a good thing.
That's
Because
the tragic. That's the
tragic.
That's
Yeah.
the like whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Now I got a little inside baseball on Robert Edward Grant.
Oh, okay.
I have to be careful how I share this, but I think I can share it in a way that's fairly anonymous.
Okay.
One of my clients who does psychedelic work, meaning like working with people, microdosing, stuff like that. She was hired by Robert Edward Grant.
Okay.
And that was like not long ago in Austin, of all places.
Mm-hmm.
And so he hired her to help him break through, like whatever, right? And so there's a couple of things that come to mind when I hear that. I think he's like close to my age.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't know who he is. He's very successful. He does all this Egypt shit, and he's very bright and articulate and erudite.
He has a hedge fund, some sort of investment thing on the business front.
Yeah. But my thought is like, okay, if you have done all these things and you are, leading all these tours with Egypt and you're able to put all these things together, why the fuck do you need to microdose in order to break through and get to these like hidden parts of like who you are? Like I guess on some level I understand it, but at a certain point, like you should pretty much figure out and know who you are, especially if you're taking people through experiences and acting as the role of a guide. Now, the other part is that he also wanted to have a relationship with this woman, right? And she's married, but she's a committed relationship. And she's like, no, sorry, that doesn't go along with the therapy, right? Like, I am not your therapy.
Right.
But that's where he wanted to go. Now, I don't know what his status is, but it's like, to me, it's just like really fucking weird.
Yeah.
And it's like, where are the boundaries here?
Exactly.
And I, you know, I'm not, I might get in trouble over this. I don't know, but look, I'm just telling you, I got some inside baseball around it, and that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. So I saw the first time Robert Edward Grant came onto my radar is when I went out to Boulder for a Gene Keys gathering. And I was talking to Richard. I had been friends with Richard for years. And he mentioned that he came into town for this Gaia TV thing. But he had come from Malibu, where Blue of Earth had introduced him to Robert Edward Grant and Aubrey Marcus and all these players. So already my spidey sense was up, was like, oh, that's interesting. And then the very next Gene Keys like online retreat that I participated in, which I think was within the same year, all of a sudden it got totally communist. And all of a sudden, before every call, there was this recording of like, well, you know, don't be sure not to talk about astrology because some people don't know about astrology and we don't want to trigger them. And don't talk about the Gene Keys because some people don't know the Gene Keys very well and we don't want to trigger them. And don't cultural appropriate. And all of a sudden it just got very weird in terms of pandering to victim consciousness, when the whole point of the Gene Keys is to vanquish the victim. So it didn't line up for me. And I saw that insertion, right? That connection. And all of a sudden, Richard's doing more and more stuff with these players. And to me, it felt like it tainted the transmission and like it had tainted the community.
Yeah. Well, I saw on Blue of Earth's YouTube channel that she did a whole show with Richard Rudd.
Oh, yeah. Now they're like besties.
Yeah. So let's talk about the astrology of this. Pluto just went into Aquarius and is going to be there for 14 and a half years now, I think. And so there's this thing in astrology where like a planet goes out of bounds. And what happens, it moves just slightly above the ecliptic. And Pluto has a number of out of bounds sort of phases during its time in Aquarius. And the last time it was out of bounds, last time Pluto was out of bounds was during from like 1938 to 1953, something like that. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't in Aquarius. Like Pluto at that time was in Leo, eventually moves into Leo, which is the opposite sign of Aquarius. So what an out of bounds sort of designation brings with it, it's like it becomes kind of like rogue, like sort of begins to act on its own, and it will accentuate whatever qualities that the planet that's out of bounds brings with it, right? Okay. So in this case, Pluto is going to accentuate things like sex, right? Pluto is about sex. It's about resources. It's about the taboo, right? It's about obsession. It's about other people's money. Like there's ancestral connections with Pluto. So when Pluto goes out of bounds, those things become more prevalent in the culture. Mm-hmm. Right? Like the things that you're not supposed to talk about become talked about. Mm-hmm. The things that aren't supposed to be necessarily addressed or seen come up. Aquarius brings the whole group consciousness thing, right? So things like group relationship, group sex, group homes, like Pluto and Aquarius. If you go back and you look at like Pluto and Leo, right? That's when the baby boomers are born. And this is when this whole idea of America, God, and family becomes like really, really big. It's like Pluto and Leo kids get to experience, the 2-car family, mm-hmm. TV in the home, right? It's like they grew up in the 50s and it's all God, apple pie, and Americana. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of gives you an idea, like sort of part of Pluto and Leo. Pluto and Aquarius is completely different from that. Like it espouses very, very different values. Mm-hmm. So this idea of polyamory is kind of in the Pluto and Aquarius pocket. But to your point, the other side of that, which is the trad wife, mm-hmm. you could also kind of read that as like Pluto and Aquarius as well, because it's also like if Pluto and Aquarius is like wants to establish itself through the Aubrey Marcus world with like the poly stuff, right? Then there would be, because Aquarius is kind of reactionary, right? The reactionary part would be the trad wife part. So it's going to be very interesting seeing this get played out. And somebody brought up one of the reasons why polyamory seems to be popular is that there's like this whole idea of shared resources. You know, like you can afford more if you're living under one roof with multiple people and multiple streams of income. And I think some of that is also going to be a byproduct of this Pluto in Aquarius, because, you know, things are getting like incredibly expensive.
For sure.
Really, really, really expensive. So some of this will be kind of like, well, if we just live together, we'll be able to stretch our dollar because we'll all be able to pitch in for this rent, or we'll all be able to pitch in for the trip to Costco, which I saw a week ago. So some of this is just going to be based on economics, right? And then some of it is going to be based on like this new version of family. And so this gets into this whole idea of, are people who are at the top of the cultural food chain and push culture change, are they aware of astrology? And I think they are.
I do too.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, one thing that, and I think you're right about the shared resources, like that just makes sense, right? And we're seeing everyone like craving their community and living on their communal property. Mark specifies multiple times throughout this podcast, I just think it's important for people to know that you guys would all be doing this even if you were poor.
What? You would all be doing this even if you were poor?
Yes. Which is insane. I mean, like what a gauche, stupid thing to say, but B, they met on Raya, which is a dating site for rich people. Like, none of them would have been on it if anyone was poor.
They don't even know what a poor person fucking feels like.
No.
They've never been poor.
No. Aubrey was born into the
poor people.
Fortune.
Poor people do not glamorize like polyamorous relationships.
Not only that, poor people don't have time for polyamorous relationships.
That's exactly.
Because it requires so much processing.
Oh God.
You cannot have a full-time job or a mission or anything because your whole life
is processing
everyone's emotions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they don't have time. Like, okay, that's just like, you know, fucked up first world thinking. Really.
Totally.
Talk about white fucking privilege. Like, I'm not a big fan of promoting white privilege, but if I was going to stick a label on that, that would be like white privilege. I'm sorry.
Right. And the fact that he made a point of saying it out loud, like, even if it was something that he thought, I would think that's just a weird thought. But like, let's put this out for the public. It's so weird.
So what are we going to have next? We're going to have a movie that will feature some kind of polyamorous relationship and theme. You remember how, you know, The Big Chill was this major kind of boomer movie, and they're all looking at their lives and the meaning of their lives and everything.
But we went through that in the 90s. Like, we had that. There was that one with Sherilyn Fenn and one of the Baldwins. Like, I think there were a few three-way movies all the way back in the 90s.
But this is going to be different, though.
Well, I also think this is staged because so many of their cohorts are doing the public baptism thing. So it's like a way to balance it, maybe, with the depravity. Maybe
they don't even need to do a movie. Maybe they just need to do podcasts. Maybe this whole idea of the movie is just kind of an antiquated way of like programming people. And in fact, you know, who is there going to be their target sort of market? Is it going to be Gen Z? Does Gen Z even go to movies? I don't know. Right? Like, who are they really trying to reach here? Because they're not trying to reach boomers. I think boomers have kind of been there, done that, and maybe they're burnt out on it, whatever. Gen X, like, are they trying to reach like people in their 50s? Because Gen X is in their late 40s and 50s now. Does that sound really reasonable to Gen X people? I don't know, but
to Gen X
but
dudes, I think Gen X dudes are primed to adopt. I mean, granted, it's a little late, but Gen X dudes were the ones who were raised like a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. You know, Pluto and
yeah, I think
Libra.
there's some truth. I think there's some truth to that, right? Because when in Gen X's charts, you got Pluto and Libra, but a lot of them are born with Chiron and Aries.
Yep.
And for the men of Gen X with Chiron and Aries, they are wounded men.
Totally.
They're wounded men, and it's very different than women with Chiron and Aries. But yeah, I can see that. I can see that totally. Yeah. What about the millennials? It feels to me like of any generation, the millennials would be the ones that would be interested
I think
in
so, and
polyamory.
I think it's a great way to break the millennials because it seems like a lot of the millennials kind of rebelled by forging these traditional family.
They reject the traditional family bonds.
Really?
I think millennials have, yes,
Okay.
especially on the female side. Like you have a lot of millennial women have bought into this idea, like they're going to have the career, they're going to freeze their eggs, they're going to do all these things, and by the way, I think the millennials really leapfrogged Gen X in terms of power. Like
Gen X hasn't claimed it yet.
No, they haven't. Like there's a story kind of circulating about who was running the Biden administration.
Wasn't it Axelrod? Oh no, it was Obama.
Well,
Sorry, I was thinking
sort of, but there's this kind of story going around where it was a bunch of millennial staffers.
See, I feel like that was Sean Ryan. Like, I feel like that's why Sean Ryan was tasked to talk to Tucker to insert that narrative.
That's what I heard. Yes,
but
Sean Ryan.
When he said it, I didn't buy it.
The guy that was really running the Biden administration was the dude. I think he's from New Mexico originally. It was Joe Biden's BFF.
Okay.
I did a whole show on him. That's the guy. I think the people that were running the Biden administration were Jill, Hunter, and Jill's BFF handler.
Okay.
What's this? He's not a Lujan, but he's like kind of like he kind of like fits that model. Let me find his name again. Hold on. Jill Biden's professional husband. That's what she called him. And I did a whole show on this dude. But he's one of these people that unless you spend a lot of time, like his name just doesn't really stick.
You know, I'm thinking about what you're saying as you're looking for this of like Joe appealing to men, Aubrey appealing to men. Like the one thing about this structure that they're presenting is Aubrey's always top dog. He just chooses which hole he wants to penetrate, but he's never losing out. It's always going to be one of the women. So like what sort of disempowered dude, you know, who's not really in touch with a fully evolved, grounded masculinity wouldn't flock to that type of structure where he just gets his choice. I mean, men are wired to spread their seed far and wide. They're wired for that kind of diversity. Women are
absolutely
not. It's such a lose for the women.
So it's Bernal. This is the guy who was basically running the White House with Joe Biden.
Okay.
Anthony Bernal.
Okay.
And Anthony Bernal, Jill, and Hunter were basically running the White House. And that's how
Hunter was smart, though. I thought Hunter was a moron.
I don't think Hunter's a moron. Hunter is actually, I think, fairly intelligent.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he went to George Washington University, right?
Yeah, but with that kind of dad, he could go that doesn't. The private schools, it's just not.
He's an Aquarian. Hunter's an Aquarian too, and I think he has Mercury in Aquarian. I don't think he's dumb. I think I saw somebody do like a kind of a pretty significant sort of breakdown on Hunter Biden and his relationship with his father.
Okay.
And when I saw it, I actually had some empathy for Hunter Biden, because his father Joe just seemed like a fucking user, like a user and a loser, and he couldn't keep like the family, like fortune and finances together. And literally, if it wasn't for Hunter, like Joe Biden and the Biden family would have like dropped into insolvency. Like this is what was happening.
Mhm.
So Hunter's doing all these deals and using his dad's name and clout and everything. But of course, Joe's getting a shit ton of money from this.
Right.
And the person who's breaking this down said that Joe never ever recognized Hunter's role in bringing the business into the family, no matter how illegal it was or corrupt it was. Like he never recognized Hunter. And part of Hunter's tragic story is that all he really wanted at a certain point was Joe's approval.
Right.
And Joe Biden was such a narcissist that he couldn't even get out of his own way to thank or congratulate or give Hunter some level of respect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a whole other weird story with their relationship, because if you look at like the narrative for Joe, it was always about Bo, right? It was about Bo this, Bo that, Bo this, Bo that, you know, and then Bo theoretically dies when he goes overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bo has this like status in Joe Biden's life,
Right.
that is really exalted. And he's the one that's gone. And Hunter was like always, you know, the second course. He wasn't the main course.
Right.
And then even when Bo was no longer around, Joe still couldn't like recognize Hunter. So I believe that to be true, actually. Now, does it like, you know, take Hunter off the hook for the shit he did?
Mm-hmm.
No, it really doesn't. But it gets down into some really basic, down and dirty family dynamics.
It's
Joe
like
Biden
ordinary people.
it is.
Remember?
Joe Biden was a shitty father. Like that's really what it comes down to.
Right.
He was a shitty father. And then we get entitled Hunter, you know, and doing everything he can to kind of milk the system and like deal with his addictions at the same time. And I'm not trying to, you know, create a case where Hunter Biden's a good guy,
Mm-hmm.
but I could totally see how that gets played out in that relationship.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So was he and Jill and this Anthony Burnell guy smart enough to run things behind the scenes? Sure. Because they had all these other people that were doing whatever the fuck they wanted to do. You know, like what's his name? The guy who was in charge of the border. Like he just did whatever the fuck he wanted to do. Like it was like, you know, all these people were sort of independently just kind of running their own show.
Right.
And all like Burnell and Hunter and Jill had to do was just kind of play like party director,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and make sure certain things got done. And I think, was it Jill who was signing the auto pen? I think that's what's come out, is that Jill signed the auto pen.
Are all of those pardons null and void?
Theoretically, they should be.
I mean,
They
along
should
with
be.
his entire presidency, I would imagine.
I would think that the entire presidency should be null and void.
Right.
Because and the thing, here's the thing that blows my mind. And we'll eventually bring this back to the Aubrey Marcus part, because you brought up a point about him being a Chad and an alpha, which I want to return to.
Mm-hmm.
But the disingenuous nature of the press during the Biden administration is so fucking criminal.
Of course. Oh, yes. Yes. Criminal.
It is criminal.
It is.
And now you have like Jake Tapper, you know, sort of walking everything back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you motherfuckers every single day defended this man's cognitive abilities, right? You people should all be in jail.
Yes.
For completely and utterly lying to the American people.
Yes.
Like, it's treasonous. What they did was treasonous.
100%. 100%.
And and now you have these people. Like I did a show yesterday on the sports writer Jeff Pearlman, who has written for Sports Illustrated and all these other, like, high level magazines. He wrote Winning Time about the Lakers, and he's really well published. Jeff Pearlman is one of these, I'm sorry, socially liberal, baked in the cake morons. And he may be a good sports writer, he may be able to tell a good story, but his politics are really shit and abhorrent. And so what he has done is he's started this YouTube channel, and it's a good YouTube channel because, again, he's a good storyteller and he has a lot of topical things to say. But he's like, every now and then he shows who he is in these videos, right? But he doesn't show it all the way because he wants to grow his channel. He doesn't want to piss a bunch of people who are so-called on the right off because, in sports, that's where theoretically everybody comes together. But you go to his Threads page and you'll see exactly what, like, Jeff Pearlman is all about. And he brought up on his Threads page that Trump is senile.
Oh, Jesus.
And this is like just weeks ago. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, you're bringing this up on your Threads page while the president that you most likely voted for 4 years was mentally incapable of being president. And everybody was running a scam, including members of the press like you.
Right.
And you never said jack shit about it.
Right.
But when it comes to Trump, now Trump is senile. And it's like, when I see stuff like that, I kind of get pissed off.
I get it.
Because it's so disingenuous.
Completely.
Where were you, Jeff? For the last 4 years? Nowhere.
Well, and also the fact that there's no consequences for the press, for all their lies, for all these people and all their traitorous activity. Like, where is the justice?
There is none. Jake Tapper will still get to do what he gets to do. And guess what? He may sell a lot of copies of his fucking book. And he's good going both ways. In a healthy society. A healthy society would shun Jake Tapper. Like, a healthy society would never watch another thing that Jake Tapper had his face on in front of a camera. They would never buy a Jake Tapper book. Jake Tapper would eventually sort of like die from social extinction. Like, this is what a healthy society would do. But we don't do that. Right? We don't do that. And because we're not a healthy society, and there are people who, like, we can even go on the right, right? Like, we could use a right example. Like, there's no world where people should pay any fucking attention to Mark Levin. None. Right? Because now Mark Levin is calling out people like Alex Jones and Joe Rogan. And Mark Levin is supposed to be this bastion of conservatism. If you're a real conservative or you're a real free thinker or patriot, you would have nothing to do with fucking Mark Levin ever again. You would never listen to his show. You would never go to his YouTube channel. You would shun that man. But because we're an unhealthy society and we are addicted to people who prop up our worldview, which in many cases is deeply flawed and based on some kind of, I don't know, like mechanism that, wants to continue to tell us that the world is safe and there are people that we can trust, right? Like, because people have that, they can't do it. Like, they need their teddy bears.
Oh, yeah.
And that's who these people are. Like, Jake Tapper, I guarantee you, is Jeff Pearlman's teddy bear. And he would never, ever not, like, shun Jake Tapper. Or you'll get people on the so-called right, Mark Levin's their teddy bear. Because, he, like, speaks harshly about liberals or whatever, subject that, yeah, Mark, you go,
Well, because the bar's
Say it
been
louder.
set so low. Like, we've all been propagandized and lied to so hardcore that someone says one thing that, like, we resonate with, and then we're all in on them because it's it's just such a weak and sad pool of people giving us our information.
It's true. You know, I've often likened this to people are really starved for truth, real truth. Like people are really starved for really good whole food, you know, grass-fed steak and whatever, right? Like when you have something like that, you're like, oh my God, you know, this is really nurturing. And so people are really starved for the truth. And when they get that little smidgen you're talking about, right? It's just like a little crumb.
Yes.
It's like, oh God. Yeah. I should follow this person. I need to make sure that, I keep subscribing to their channel or whatever. And yeah, you're right. The bar is really low.
Exactly.
Really, really low. So rounding this thing off with this whole polyamory thing, the reason Aubrey Marcus fits the mold is he's a Chad. He's like, quote unquote alpha. And so dudes who aspire to that, like, people in Andrew Tate world would say, oh yeah, he's a Chad. Look at him. He's got these women and he's able to set up, these multiple relationships and have multiple baby mamas. And that's what I want.
In this very regressive, chauvinistic way. Like, it creeped me out watching Aubrey's wife break down. Like, she was in full-on trauma mode, and that her man is just allowing this to happen. Like, I don't think that's a real alpha male. I would imagine
it's not a real alpha male at all.
Right.
It's not a real alpha male at all. It's actually, I mean, I think you could probably make a case in some ways that that's a man that actually hates women.
I mean, that resonates with me. And it's also, and again, like, we don't know what's going on with Aubrey. I've never met him, so I don't claim to know him. But the Aubrey pre his car accident that messed up his face is a very different Aubrey than the version we're dealing with now. So it's also like, is he under mind control? Like, who's controlling Aubrey that's having him behave this way? I have no idea. Maybe this is him fully. I don't know.
Do you think that that this is going to be successful? Do you think, because I was doing a little search here on like polyamory, and let me show you just some of the stuff that I found, which is mildly interesting. Hold on, see if I can find it. I always get these tabs that I want to keep. Okay, so here we go. So I asked Google, right, about polyamory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what came up. Now remember, this is the AI overview, so maybe the AI has a vested interest, but yes, polyamory appears to be on the rise with increasing openness to non-monogamous relationships. Particularly among younger generations, this trend is reflected in various aspects of society, including mainstream dating apps, popular culture, and even some legal considerations. So you got surveys and data from dating apps like OkCupid and Tinder indicate a significant increase in individuals expressing openness to or seeking non-monogamous relationships, including polyamory. Gen Z and polyamory. Gen Z in particular shows a higher level of interest and acceptance of polyamory, with a substantial percentage reporting an openness to or pursuit of non-monogamous relationships. I think this one is probably more real than polyamory, because I got to tell you, a lot of the Gen Z young women that I have been meeting want to get married and have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if this is completely true, and they could certainly parse that with this, right? Polyamorous mainstream gaining visibility in popular culture with television shows, in movies. That's the thing that I think is going to, like, hold on a second. Like, I think that Netflix will come up with a poly series.
For sure.
That's right. Netflix or HBO will have some kind of poly series.
Yep.
It won't be a movie. It'll be a Netflix series.
Right.
And then it gets into the economic factors that we talked about, which I do think are a thing and could contribute to it. So what do you think At the end of the day, do you think the psyop will be successful? Do you think the top-down culture changers, knowing that Pluto's in Aquarius, want to take advantage of it, shape this thing into kind of a world religion? Do you think they'll be successful?
I think it's already successful. And I think that it doesn't even matter if we see more polyamory on the ground or not, just in terms of loosh harvesting, distraction, co-opting the mass attention, it's already successful. And yeah, I have no doubt that the people who allowed Aubrey, like, he does have an effect on culture. He hasn't done a lot of podcasts lately. So I think that's also the fact that, like, he's not flooding the space with all of his podcasts. It's just like he hasn't done one in a while. Probably. I mean, what you and me and probably everyone watching has noticed is, like, how few people have, like, a core or center of their own and will just go wherever the cultural engineers are telling them to go. So yeah, it probably will be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. A really, really valid point. Like, if they could get a shit ton of people to do the ice bucket challenge,
right?
Anything's possible. Do you remember? Okay, this is one of the weird ones. Do you remember when they were doing the Pokemon thing, and it was the augmented reality Pokemon thing? Do you remember that?
Like back in the day?
No, this was maybe, I don't know, 2015, 2016, right around there.
What was the gist?
Well, the gist was they were taking Pokemon, like, out of the phone or the game,
Mm-hmm.
and they were kind of geolocating various Pokemon.
Yes, I remember.
And people had to go find them.
Yes.
Like, it was so crazy how many fucking people, they were generally young people, but not always, were, like, doing that. And I know people almost got killed doing that because they weren't paying attention to what's going on around them. All they were interested in is geolocating this Pokemon that was, like, supposedly somewhere in the area that they were. But that's another one of those things where people were just quickly socially engineered, just jump in on this fad and, make it happen. So
well,
I
wonder if this isn't something we're going to see more of, because you mentioned that Pluto in Aquarius is more reactive, more like responding to other things. So just look at, like, you go on Twitter and someone's like, what's the one thing that you miss from your childhood the most? People actually answer that shit. Like they're not self-directed in what they're doing. They're wired to just respond. So I wonder if, because Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring out more of that in people, just responding instead of directing their own lives and relationships.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And I also, so we'll throw Uranus into the mix too, because Uranus is going to move into Gemini, and it retrogrades. But in 2026, it is fully in Gemini and is fully engaged in a harmonic relationship with Pluto, air to air, Gemini to Aquarius, right? And Gemini is about, like, mirrors and like the subdivision of the self. And I could easily see a reality where you would have two extreme models going on simultaneously. You would have the trad wife model and you'd have the poly model. And it's almost like those two realities would sort of, like, branch off, right? Yep. And create their own sort of cultures. I could easily see that happening.
I could see that as well.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see, like, how the media responds, or which model is driven the most, right? Like, which one is going to receive the most top-down attention about this is the wave of the future, and how they're going to compete against one another.
It also seems like, because they're going to go neck and neck, my sense, they need them to stay unresolvable, at odds, but alive in the public consciousness. But it seems like the poly is a great kind of gateway drug to full-on collectivism communism.
Totally. You know, so you bring up an amazing point, and there's a school of thought that isn't socialism, and it's not communism, it's communitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
And I could totally see how the poly fits into the communitarian model. It's like hand in glove. And you would be surprised. Like, I remember watching this interview, and there's this guy named Will, I think his name is Will Kane.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out of the sports world, and he moved into, like, he was always kind of like on the right or the conservative side of the sports world, right? And he gets moved into Fox world. And I think Will Kane's role at Fox was to, at some point, become the new Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were grooming him for. I think he's still with Fox. And he did this interview one time with Tucker, and I thought it was a very interesting interview. Will Kane describes himself as a communitarian.
Hmm.
And I'd never heard anybody use that word in like the lexicon of the media,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly somebody like Will Kane, who's supposedly on the right. And so I asked myself, does he understand what that means?
Mm-hmm.
Really, does he understand what that means? Or is that really what he is? And if that's what he is, then this whole idea of communitarianism isn't going to look like, it won't always look like Polyworld, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are going to be people that will kind of join in the band.
Oh, yeah.
That will be unlike, say, Aubrey Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, Will Kane is kind of in this world. Oh, well, if he's in this world, maybe it's okay for me. Right. So I feel like, to your point, that there's something there, and it's going to be very interesting to watch this thing unfold,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, Dani, it's always great having you on. And, I love peeling back the layers of the onion with you, because you're so versatile and you're well faceted in so many different disciplines. We just go anywhere with this stuff. I've got the link in the description for the show, DaniKatz.com. By the way, Dani and I met each other for the first time in 3D, not once, but twice, when she was here in the Hill Country. And Dani's talk was fantastic at Confluence. Really, really, really good. So if you have an opportunity to see Dani live and give her presentation, or better yet, buy her book, Betterarchy, which gets into all the principles of language that Dani brought up, which I think hopefully for some of those people, it was a game changer. And how you've kind of broken down how the elites use language to separate us, which is a really amazing concept. So anyway, thanks again, Dani, for being here, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for all your support.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Okay, there she goes, the great Dani Katz. And while I have you as a captured audience, I do want to remind you that I will be in Frisco, Texas in October with David, the Leo King Palmer, and a bunch of other people at the Bridge Expo. And if you go through the link, which I provided in the show notes, you can get a massive discount for the show. Really, really big discount. So if you want to go, and I encourage you to go, because it's going to be a great time. David's going to be DJing, and if you haven't been in the room when David is chopping it up, I guarantee you will enjoy the hell out of the experience. That alone. David and I will be closing the show together on Sunday night. There'll be other speakers, other workshops. But if you go into the show notes now and you sign up, you will get a very significant discount to the show, which I heartily recommend you do. Okay. We'll be back here on Sunday night. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about. Maybe we'll continue to roll this polyamory thing in Pluto and Aquarius, but I'm sure that there's some, I don't have to dig very far to find a lot of nuggets. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the show. Hit like, hit subscribe. If you do like the show, you can always leave me a cup of coffee, which is there as well, if you appreciated the show. And finally, I do astrological readings for a living, and the link to that is also in the show notes. My new website will be launched by the 11th of June, and I am going to tell you right now, the prices for everything will go up. It's just the nature of where we are economically, and I haven't raised my prices for years. So I'm not going to go exorbitant, but they will go up. So if you are interested in getting a reading at the prices that exist now, I would jump on it. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. Treat each other well. God bless. Love you all. Bye for now.